And welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sainsbury.
Welcome, Simon. Another Sunday evening, and after our ramblings last week over all the complex national issues and the fun that was going on, our focus this week is much more local.
Indeed. So, yes, this week we welcome back, it's not kind of quite newly minted, but it is quite a recent development. But we welcome back to the show a multiple-time guest is Councillor Corkery, who is now the leader of the Labour group on Portsmouth City Council. So a completely different thing. So it's not just our voices. We've got someone that actually knows what they're talking about. Welcome, Cal.
So, welcome.
Thank you both very much. Glad to join you.
So I guess first we better offer you congratulations on being elected as the leader of the local Labour group. Is that an honour bestowed upon you by your peers in the Labour Council group?
It has been, yep. I'm enjoying it so far. There's a few extra meetings for the diary, which is always good.
Splendid. Well, let's start then by looking back at those May elections, and Labour increased the number of councillors to 9. They won a seat in the north of the city in Cosham. So, reflecting on the May elections, how would you describe them?
I think we were very happy with the outcome. It was something we'd been aiming for. Clearly, we identify early on in the campaign particular areas where we're going to focus our resources and areas where we think we're in a good chance of winning those seats. So we had a strategy from early on that I and others were involved in drawing up, and then over the course of the long campaign we rolled that strategy out, and it's proven to have been fairly effective, which is clearly something that we welcome. It's quite hard to tell when you're in the midst of the campaign and the kind of down in the trenches as it is. It's sometimes hard to know exactly how it's going to go, and I think there were certainly a number of wards going into polling day and even going into the count where us and the other parties that were involved were probably none the wiser really about how it was going to turn out. So it did make for a fairly tense and interesting count. But yeah, we were happy to come away with the result that we did, winning 5 wards across the city. In fact, the best result for Portsmouth Labour since 1998, so for quite some time. We won the popular vote across the city as well, which we haven't done for a little while. So it was a good result for us. I think there were a couple of wards where we only fell very short. I mean, Milton is the obvious one where it was less than 40 votes in it. We were very keen to try and get Paula elected in Milton because I think she'd be a very good councillor. It was clearly a very tight race between her and Steve Pitt there. Steve eventually getting over the line. But we did get a couple of other new councillors added to the group, as well as re-electing the 3 Labour councillors who were up for election. And we're very glad to welcome Ashgar Shah and Cosham and Yinka Adenarin to the group. I think they've made really great starts already, and looking forward to working with them over the coming year.
Yeah, I think probably, again, if we look at those results, Cosham looked like the big gain for Labour. Obviously, most of your effort, activities and success seem to be based in the south of the city. How important do you feel it is to have that foothold now in the north?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've always been keen over the years within our internal party organisation to ensure that we are campaigning across the city, across both constituencies and across all 14 wards around the city. We don't believe there should be any no-go areas for Labour. Clearly, in recent times, Portsmouth North has largely become a no-go area for Labour and other parties. But this year there's been, it seems, a bit of a sea change, and we were delighted that Shah got over the line. I think that was one which wasn't so much of a surprise to me, to be honest, on polling day. It may have been a surprise to other parties, but having been out in Cosham in the weeks leading up to polling day with Shah, it was clear he was very well known. I think I've honestly never come across a local election candidate, even people up for re-election, who have got such good name recognition on the doorstep. Yeah, a lot of the people I was knocking on the door said, Shah's already been round, or we know Shah because he does this. So we were really glad that he got the result that he deserved and joins us on the council.
Excellent. I can't say I was surprised by. I was hopeful for Shah's result, but I can't say I was surprised, although Ian felt differently.
I think you know, again, if I look at it, I was surprised by the result, because I was surprised that that the Conservatives could lose Cosham, but I think anyone who knows Shah or knows of Shah knows that you know, he's worked very hard for the community and did an awful lot of work during the pandemic. So from that sort of personal perspective, I'm sure he'll do a very decent job as my local councillor.
Indeed, indeed. So so moving on to our next question. So Labour unsurprisingly chose to return the Lib Dem administration as you'd previously promised, because there was no way in hell you would return the Conservatives. But the interesting thing was, after the dust had settled of the actual election itself, you and the Conservatives kind of seemed to both kind of divvy up the committee chairs, which seemed to be something that the Lib Dems weren't necessarily so happy about. But what was your thinking around that?
Well, our thinking was that we wanted to secure as many chairships of the scrutiny panels and the statutory committees for Labour councillors as possible, because we see those as really important forums where we can put forward our policies and our principles. For example, I won an elected contest against Gerald Vernon's action for the chair of the Employment Committee. And I was keen to do that so that we can use that position to drive forward our campaigns, in particular the living wage, but also our wider remit to ensure that all workers within council services, whether those directly employed by the council or in outsourced or privatised services, enjoy decent terms and conditions and fair pay. So there were a number of other positions that weren't won by Labour representatives. I think probably one of the most contentious was the licensing committee chairship. So there were two candidates for that. One was the Conservative candidate, Scott Pater Harris, who'd previously been vice chair. And the other was George Madgwick, the kind of so-called independent councillor, formerly of UKIP, who was being backed by the Lib Dems. And our decision within that particular election was to support Scott Pater Harris on the basis that he had more experience for the role and we thought was a better fit. There was also one other scrutiny panel position, which I think was the governance, audit and scrutiny panel, which the role of that panel in particular is to hold the administration to account. So our position there was that that shouldn't be chaired by a member of the administration or a member of the same party as the administration, because that probably wouldn't allow for the kind of the independence needed to effectively scrutinise the administration and the cabinet in the work that they're doing.
Okay, so these commit, because in our system in Portsmouth we have a cabinet system. So most of the city's decisions are made in cabinet or by the brief holder of that particular cabinet, and it's only if the council kind of call things back in to be called in and considered by full council. So kind of what role do the committee, you mentioned obviously about governance and standards and about holding the way the administration does its business to account, but what other function do the other committees have in that sort of setup? Is there much of a power base there? What's the function of them in that respect?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the cabinet model that we have means that whoever is leader of the council, I would say, gets about 99% of the policy and the budget making power, because they have the remit then to appoint their cabinet members. And the cabinet members hold most of that decision making power. So clearly we supported the Lib Dems to continue to run the cabinet, as you said, to keep the Tories out, and we were clear that we would always do that. The scrutiny panels, I think, can play an important role in holding the administration to account. So last year I was chair of the Housing and Social Care Scrutiny Panel, and we led a review on local social housing repairs and maintenance services. And that was off the back of feedback that we'd got as a Labour group, as councillors out in our wards, social housing tenants coming to us and raising quite serious concerns about the services they were receiving. So that's one way in which we can try and shine a light on what's happening and draw out some recommendations about how policy could be developed in the future. As well as the scrutiny panels, you've also got the statutory committees, so planning and licensing, which are run in a quasi-judicial manner, which basically means that they should be run kind of non-politically, and decisions should be taken based on the merits of the case and the advice that's given by officers. So they are more apolitical bodies that are there to perform a quite important legal function.
Yeah, and when Simon and I looked at this, we thought it seemed, you know, again, you talk about holding the administration to account. It seemed to us that, you know, the Lib Dems, having claimed almost all of the prizes, I was very surprised that they were as upset as they were, that both Labour and the Conservatives looked to construct a situation where they would be held to account. Were you surprised at just how much of a pushback, or as a that you seem to get as a result of that?
Not really, no. I think that's local politics, isn't it? I think no one is really surprised when Gerald flies into a fit of thorough rage. I mean, I know he made comments about not being able to sleep at night because he hadn't got his picks for committee chairs, which we did think was a bit rich. I mean, as the leader of a local authority coming out the back of the pandemic, facing serious cost of living crisis, as well as issues in social care, housing, education, if the one thing that is keeping the leader of the council up at night is the fact that he couldn't get his picks in for committee chairs, you have to ask the question about what the priorities are.
Which is fair enough. So if we look at the election and how well it went for local Labour, how much of that do you attribute it as a positive move towards local Labour, or, you know, is more of a bearing the disenfranchisement with Conservatives nationally?
I think the mess that the Conservative Party here and nationally clearly played a role in these elections. I mean, across the city, the Conservative vote crashed and they lost a significant number of their councillors who were up, or the wards which they held that were up. In terms of our performance and where we were able to make gains, I think it probably played a more limited role, because, I mean, most of the wards where we were looking to either re-elect councillors or gain seats were Lib Dem Labour marginals. So they're the kind of Conservative for, I mean, in some ways, arguably, that may have gone against Labour, because disaffected Conservative voters are perhaps more likely to go Lib Dem than Labour in those wards. Clearly in Cosham, which was the kind of the one major ward where it was a Labour Tory kind of marginal almost, I think it did play a role there. But I'm pretty confident that Shah would have won whatever was happening nationally, because, as I said, he was a very popular and energetic local campaigner.
I think you were entitled to your half laugh in the middle of that sentence, the disarray of the National Conservatives. I'm going to let that one go.
Well, other people might use different words, but it's a family show.
Absolutely.
I'm being polite.
You're probably more polite than I am at the moment.
Okay, so so bearing in mind, obviously, the disarray there is kind of nationally, other words are available. Are you kind of thinking forward to the next general election? Does that mean that you're better off with Boris still being in charge? Are you backing Boris to stay in charge because that makes for a better result for Labour at the general? Do you think?
No, I don't want him in charge for one more minute, let alone one more day or one more week. I know there have been kind of arguments floated around that maybe it's in Labour's interest to let Boris continue to destroy the Conservative Party and the country, because it may be in our kind of long-term electoral benefit. But I can't accept that argument when I'm going out in my community every day and seeing the impact that the failure of government is having on people. Obviously, people suffered massively over the pandemic. The cost of living crisis is now really starting to hit. and we've got people really struggling. They need a government that is competent and standing up for them and actually delivering services that improve their lives. And all the time we've got Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, that's not going to happen. So I think he needs to go as soon as possible. That's not to say I've got any great faith in whoever the Conservative Party might line up to replace him, but I can't see that they're going to be any worse.
Well, that's a difficult bar to fall under, isn't it? Really, surely, to find worse. Who would out of interest, who would be the replacement that you would fear the most? I don't know if fear is the right word, but you would find the most competent and substantial competition. If you've got an unfavourite, if you like.
I mean, from my perspective, I'm not sure there is a massively strong contender, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why Boris is still in his place. If there was an obvious successor who was suddenly going to boost the Conservative poll ratings, then I think they would be in number 10 by now. But I think one of the problems they're struggling with is that they haven't got anyone lined up, and they haven't got anyone that's kind of competent and willing to do the job.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's one where I think we can actually agree, Cal. I think there is a situation at the moment where, you know, there is no clear successor, and ultimately, and I think until there is, well, the fact is that the 1922, our own internal processes, almost played their Boris card too soon, or the Joker, if you will. And now we've had the 2 by-elections. I wonder whether it would be different if the card was played today, but the rules say he's got another 11 months before that can happen again. So,
well, unless they change the rules, of course.
Wouldn't it just be ironic if the man for whom rules don't apply, the 1922 committee, changed the rules to oust him? But we can hope.
Yeah, I mean, after all, what's the point in supporting a populist if he's no longer popular? But there we go.
Well, yes, indeed. Right. So enough of Boris and national issues. So if we come back to local issues, you've been over the last couple of years, Cal, you've been very vocal about the living wage for all subcontracted services for PCC, and I think Asger's maiden speech spoke about insourcing the refuse collection when it comes up again next year. Now, both of those policies seem very noble, but will almost certainly cost the council more. So surely are we not at a situation that to make those policies a reality, there are going to have to be cuts elsewhere?
Well, I think for the Labour group, we've got a number of key priorities that we've published during the election campaign in terms of our manifesto priorities, and we've kind of reiterated those coming out of the election to talk about what we will be focusing on over the coming year. And like you say, kind of the insourcing of council services back into kind of direct provision by the council and living wage accreditation are 2 of those top priorities that we will be really focusing on and trying to get implemented. In terms of insourcing the waste collection contracts, that's a specific manifesto pledge that's been in our last 2 manifestos, so last year and this year. So it was really welcome to see last week a report finally being brought to Cabinet, which looks specifically at that issue. And Cabinet, apparently the Lib Dem Cabinet now agree with our policy and they're willing to implement it. And although the kind of exact details of the report haven't been published, I think due to kind of commercial confidentiality, I think it's probably fair to say that the outcome of that analysis has been that the council can provide those services on a fairly competitive basis and ensure that they are providing a decent quality service over which the council has direct control and influence, while at the same time ensuring that workers within those services are paid properly and entitled to fair pensions, fair holiday pay, and decent terms and conditions at work.
But is that not always the double-edged sword, though, Cal? Is that, you know, again, if to insource costs the people of Portsmouth more, or other services have to be cut, it seems a strange ideological choice to make, to say, well, yeah, it's going to cost you more, the service may suffer because, you know, the big waste companies that tender for these, that is their night and day business. That's why they exist. Is it not taking a huge gamble to insource that and potentially see a deterioration in service and an increase in cost?
I don't think there is any evidence that it would cost the council a lot more to provide the service in-house. And actually, I would argue the exact opposite, where councils around the country over the last couple of years have started to insource services again, ending a period where privatisation seemed to be dominant within local government. Those local authorities who have taken those steps are finding that it is often more cost efficient for them to provide the service themselves, as well as allowing for kind of greater flexibility and greater service quality. And I think what you have to remember is that when you're outsourcing services to the private sector, they're not providing a service out of the kind of goodness of their hearts. They're doing it to make profit. And they quite often do make very significant profits on public sector contracts. So I think when those public sector contracts are brought back in-house, we've got those profit margins to play with. So those profit margins can be used either as savings for local authorities, or they can be used to reinvest back into the service and its staff, rather than being distributed out to corporate shareholders.
Yeah, and I think that's always the balance of the argument. When we look at the living wage, I think that's something you've brought to full council a couple of times, and I think every time you've been pushed back with an explanation, or you perhaps you could label it as an excuse, that the one-off cost of doing that would guarantee that there would have to be cuts in other services. How do you see a path through to being able to deliver that pledge without some other part of the council's budget having to be slashed to make it happen?
Well, I think there probably will be an initial cost uplift to paying people fairly that are working in these outsourced services. But the argument we would make is that's an investment. I mean, the vast bulk of this extra cost would go to frontline carers working in adult and children's social care services. So the typical service where there's a lot of low paid people on less than the real living wage is home care. So people that are travelling out and about on council contracts, but employed by private companies on minimum wage, 0 hours contracts, going around to visit elderly and vulnerable people in their homes and provide them with essential care and support. Now, our argument there would be is if you start paying people properly and give them decent terms and conditions at work, you're going to have much better services, because I know countless people who are really passionate about working in social care, but have had to leave their job and leave their clients who they care a massive amount about and have built long-term relationships with, because they can go and get £2, £3, £4, £5 an hour more working in a local supermarket or another local sector. Also important work. But what we want to do is really encourage people to stay within the social care sector and show them that there is a long-term career path for them where they're going to be paid fairly. They're going to have enough money to pay the bills and put food on their table, as well as doing the job that they love. So we believe there would be kind of long-term financial as well as social benefits to the council and to the city of paying people fairly that work in those services.
Is there an argument for insourcing that as well?
Definitely, and I think that's a point we've made. I think ensuring that people who are working in contracted out services are paid at least the real living wage, for me, is the first step on the road towards insourcing. Because when we have discussions with the council's commissioners and we ask them what's the number one reason why this service can't be insourced, they say it's the wage differential. Because if it was insourced, we would have to pay people at least the real living wage, whereas the private sector pays them the minimum wage. So if we're requiring the private sector to pay them up to the living wage, I think all of a sudden insourcing looks much more viable.
Yeah, I guess in the sector, if you look at adult social care particularly, almost the entire cost is labour, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It's the most important factor, and it just goes to show how important labour is in those services and across the wider economy. Without labour, these services wouldn't be running. We wouldn't have social care services to look after our sick and vulnerable. We wouldn't have the NHS being staffed the way it is. We wouldn't have any public services without the people who are there on the front line providing them.
Excellent.
Okay, so so Labour's national leadership. We talked a bit about Tory national leadership. So obviously, nationally, the Labour Party seems to be having. You've got some parts of the strong socialist ideological position of the Corbyn era and the more centrist leadership style under Starmer. What bearing does that sort of situation have on the local Labour Party and indeed on your style and time as the group leader?
I think, of course, we're part of the Labour Party and we're part of the Labour movement. So what happens nationally, we pay close attention to, and we have our views about. But what I think we are successful in being able to do locally is to kind of work collectively as a team around our commonly agreed manifesto priorities and our commonly agreed strategy. So we don't have, I wouldn't say, much kind of tension or division within the local party. Most of us, if not all of us, are kind of signed up to what we need to do in order to represent the people that rely on us in our communities and ensure that we've got a strong Labour representation on the council.
Okay, it was quite interesting because this time, obviously, the change in leadership from George to yourself. So you were deputy under George Fielding, and now with you as leader, you've got Charlotte Gerarda as deputy. But that change was obviously a completely marked difference to the time before, where I'm not talking about when Stephen left the council group and George took over, but in times gone by, what was it, 2014? There was quite a lot of drama, whereas this is almost actually slipped under the radar to the point that actually, this is why we also thought it was interesting to get you on and actually hear what your vision for the party and the city was actually aren't kind of no drama handovers a better thing for everyone concerned, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think within our Labour group, as it stands now, we've got a really talented and experienced bunch, amongst which we're able to share out a whole host of different responsibilities and roles. And clearly, leader and deputy leader are kind of two of those roles. But I wouldn't necessarily say they're the most important. They just hold particular responsibilities and functions with them. But across the whole team, we've got a really good bunch, and I'm really proud to have been selected to play that role of leader. But we are very much take a collective approach towards the way we organise and we campaign, and everyone's got a really important part to play.
So is there anything you'd say to anybody that was particularly of the ideological bent or particularly joined under the Corbyn years, that perhaps kind of feel Starmer's direction for the party nationally isn't kind of the direction Labour wants to go to? Is there something you'd say to them to keep them in the as it were, the Labour family? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I've personally got some kind of sympathy with that perspective, having joined as a result of Corbyn's leadership myself, and always been a supporter of the new direction that the party was taken. But I think for me, what I've learned, particularly since being a member, is more about the culture and the history of the Labour Party and its relationship towards the Labour movement. The Labour Party has always been a broad church, even during, I mean, to give an example, the kind of high point of Labour government after the Second World War, you had real left-wingers such as Nye Bevan, kind of part of the cabinet amongst people who might be more centrist or kind of soft left, and they all worked together around a national programme of transforming the country, kind of forming the NHS and providing public services. So I think for me, it's about looking at the bigger picture. We're not always going to agree, and it would be pretty boring if we did always agree, to be honest. I think a bit of healthy debate is good, but I do think we need to kind of foster that sense within the party and within the movement of being able to disagree with people in a way that's kind of respectful and constructive, and not sowing seeds of division.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Cal, because I know when, obviously when Starmer took over, I double about on social media, and I saw a lot of what I would say, very strong left-leaning groups where, Labour Party members were taking I'm tearing up my membership card. I won't ever support, I won't ever support Starmer. And I had that conversation that said, well, doesn't that mean that the Conservatives are going to win then? And there seemed to be a very vocal minority for whom it was almost a case of, well, if we can't have the Corbyn brand of Labour and socialism, then almost we're going to let the Conservatives win. Do you think that sentiment is starting to die down now, or do you think there's still that element out there?
Yeah, and I think you're right. That was some people's reaction, and nationally as well as locally, we've seen members, quite often members who were very committed to the party and committed to the cause, the kind of really important people that would go out there and do the hard work on the doorstep, as well as the hard work behind the scenes. We've seen, unfortunately, a significant number of people leave as a result in the change in winds nationally. And I can understand and kind of partially sympathise with people who may want to do that. I think what I would again kind of reiterate is that Labour is a broad church, and under the political system that we have, first past the post, there is one show in town when it's in terms of challenging the Tory government and trying to ensure that we have a left of centre government nationally and locally, and that's the Labour Party. So I would certainly encourage people not to leave. I think things do change, and it's important that people continue to make their arguments, as long as they do so in a way that's respectful and accepts that people might not always agree with them.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me now looking at the Conservative Party, because you have similar divisions in that you have many members of the Conservative Party now who are desperately unhappy with their leader and with no mechanism to make that change.
Absolutely, yeah, and look at what it's doing to the Tories nationally and locally. Division is not the way to go.
It's not helpful. So moving on to our next question, and again, this one potentially could be contentious, and I hope Owen's listening. With strikes on the railways, and with a number of votes that are starting to queue up, I think the postal workers, teachers, are we looking at a summer / autumn / winter of discontent?
I think we might well be, and I think that it's not unexpected and not unreasonable for that to happen. If you look at what's happened to Labour and the employment market over many years, we've seen profits continue to rise year on year, while the people who provide those services and run those companies at the coalface have seen their wages stagnate, if not reduce in real terms. And there's a lot of people who are now really struggling to get by, faced with massively skyrocketing bills. And all the government and many employers can do is turn around and say to people, sorry, but you're going to have to accept a real terms pay cut. But I think what the railway workers are showing is that actually workers don't need to accept those pay cuts. They can join a trade union, they can organise with people in their workplaces, and where they do, they hold a lot of power. Like I said earlier, public services and private companies cannot run, they cannot operate without the labour that they rely on. So I think it's about time that working people start exercising a bit of that power, fighting their corner, and ensuring that they get the pay and the terms and conditions that they need to live decent lives.
So I guess looking at that, and again, I've made my views fairly clear. The railway and the RMT, which I think we both acknowledge is both a strong but perhaps a more old-fashioned union, they appear to be the sort of flag bearers in terms of this charge. Is there, are the rail workers really are they the deserving cause? Because ultimately, if they get a double-digit pay rise, then I think many people would have much more sympathy, and we've already touched on it, for nurses, carers, teachers. If the railway workers are worth 10%, then surely that's just going to be the start of Well, if they want 10, I want 11.
And good for them. I hope that is what happens. I think we need every worker in their workplace to be standing up for their rights. And for me, a key employment right is that no one should have their wages cut. So if inflation is 7 or 9%, anyone who is getting a pay increase of less than 7 or 9% is having their pay cut. And like you say, why should people accept having their pay cut, particularly those people who have been on the front line, whether it's in the railways or public services or the private sector over the last couple of years, keeping the economy going, keeping people safe and well through the course of the pandemic? Why should they now have to pay the price by having their wages cut? So, I mean, I fully support the railway workers in their dispute. You probably can't see it. I think it's just a bit out of picture, but I'm proudly sporting my RMT badge that was gifted to me by one of the workers I met on the picket lines locally this week. And I think speaking to those workers, what was clear to me was that, yes, this was a dispute for them about pay. Why should they accept a pay cut? I don't think they should. Although I think ultimately they would accept probably a small pay cut, as long as they're getting a half decent pay rise that sees their wages almost keep up with inflation. But they were also really passionate about the railways. They were passionate about providing good quality services. A lot of the people we spoke to were guards, so people that play a really important function on the trains in terms of passenger safety, and ensuring that people are looked after if they need it, and ensuring that trains are safe and welcoming places for people to use, as well as other railway workers who play a really important function. So they were just as passionate about safety and about the quality of the railway service as they were about pay.
We could go deeper into this one, I think.
We could. There's probably a whole episode on that. I guess it's the well, if we clapped them and recognised them during the pandemic, are they not? If they're that valuable that it grinds to a halt without them, are they also not valuable enough to deserve decent conditions and pay rises? Not that I'm trying to make the RMT's point for them, but that kind of seems to be the logical argument to me. But
and there is money out there. It's not like the country is skint. In the railways, we have chief executives earning millions and kind of profits in the hundreds of millions. There is money there. It's just not being directed into the pockets of the people who provide those services on the front line.
And I think that's a strange place where we might find some consensus, Cal, is that for me, the privatisation of the railway system is farcical, and I would support nationalising it, because I think it's an infrastructure that should be being utilised and being maximised from a green perspective. And look, demand has fallen by a third. So under the current model, the income is significantly down, and that's why I struggle with this concept of a double-digit pay rise and no guarantee of redundancies, because I look at it through the lens of, well, if the demand is down by a third, how can the employer guarantee that there will be no compulsory redundancies? And ultimately, to fund a double-digit pay rise, I haven't seen the numbers to know whether the profits that are paid to shareholders could fund that, or whether that would be the government having to write another very large cheque to subsidise the running of the railways.
And the government did write a very large cheque during the pandemic to subsidise the running of railways, but that money wasn't passed through the system, as I said, to the people on the front line.
Yeah, it was used to prop the whole system up, where effectively nobody was using the railways, and with demand now down by a third, that's the piece where the detailed numbers say, well, okay, if you're still pulling profits and bonuses, well, you shouldn't be, but if the profits and bonuses don't cover it, then ultimately it falls back to government to fill the gap, does it not?
It does, and I think the government has a very important role to play in supporting public transport across the country, and I can't see any reason why the government isn't running the industry themselves. That they are almost at arm's length. The companies are almost like middlemen. We were speaking to the staff on strike locally this week, and they were talking about the way in which the Department for Transport micromanages the industry, to the extent where at Fratton Harbour Station, if they want to take on one new member of staff, they have to get it signed off by the Department for Transport. Now that sounds to me almost like a nationalised industry in all but name. So we may as well go the full hog and ensure that it is being run nationally in a coherent and an efficient way that doesn't see profits being skimmed off by private companies.
We agree.
There we go. Right. An agreement for nationalisation of the railways. Who'd have thought? Right. Okay. So our next question. So with the while the government put the results in Tiverton Honiton and in Wakefield down to normal kind of mid-term results, the usual sort of thing of, well, it's mid-term in the Parliament, we're bound to do badly at by-elections. That's what normally happens, and those seats, we regain those seats in a general election, etc., etc. But what lessons do you feel there are for the opposition parties, considering obviously the returning of Wakefield back into Labour hands in the by-election on Thursday, and the Lib Dems taking Tiverton and Honiton out of Tory hands on Thursday as well? What lessons are there for the opposition parties who want to end the party for Johnson?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it does raise the obvious question that has been asked of both parties around kind of electoral alliances and whether tactical voting played a role. And kind of personally, I think that's something that does need to be looked at. But I mean, there are also massive difficulties with it. Clearly, it has the benefits of potentially increasing the number of non-Tory MPs at the next general election, which may hasten their decline and ensure that we've got a left, or at least a kind of centre-left government following that election. However, I think there are kind of practical issues which may make it difficult. I know that, personally speaking, as a committed Labour Party member in a kind of local party, I think if we were suddenly told you need to stand back and let another party take the lead in your constituency, I think we would probably struggle to accept that. If it is going to work, I think it needs to be something, especially from the Labour Party perspective, the other parties will probably feel the same. I think it needs to be something that is locally led and not just kind of declared by the National Party, because otherwise it's not going to work. However, I personally think probably something that it is worth looking at and looking at the practicalities of how and why it could work.
Do you think that's you mentioned it earlier? Do you think that's a bit of a byproduct of first past the post? Would we be better off if we had some form of PR?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm in favour of PR. Our local Labour Party is in favour of PR, and we sent a motion to the last Labour Party conference actually calling for the party to adopt PR as its policy, a motion which actually only narrowly fell, interestingly. And yeah, I do think it will probably resolve a lot of those issues should PR be adopted, but we are where we are with the electoral system as it stands at the moment.
Yeah, you've got to win under the current system, right, to change it.
Absolutely.
And is that not always the dilemma of PR? Is that the Conservatives will never go for PR, because ultimately, if you look at vote share and you know what you will almost certainly end up with under PR is a left alliance. So the Conservatives are never going to vote for it. So the real kingmakers for PR are the Labour Party, and the only way that they'll ever change it is when they get a majority. But is that dilemma not the fact that having won under the previous system, it's almost certain that should they then vote through PR, they are almost they're never going to stand in government alone. They're always going to be in some kind of coalition, which is why the Labour Party have always, or seem to have shied away from the PR option.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's easy to be attracted to PR when you're in opposition and it's going to potentially be to your benefit. But like you say, when you gain power, for a party that's got a majority under a first past the post system, if they were to implement PR, that would almost definitely mean handing away the power that they have and the influence that they have. So whether we're actually going to find ourselves in a situation where a national party is willing to do that in government, we shall see.
So will that motion be being raised again at this year's Labour Party conference?
I don't think it can. I think we've got a rule that something can't be brought back the next year. I think it has to miss a year, but it's certainly still on the agenda. I mean, just to go into the kind of nitty gritty of how Labour Party conference works very quickly, is the votes are split between 50% local parties and 50% affiliates, so primarily trade unions. When the motion was brought to last conference, the local parties were overwhelmingly in favour, but it was the affiliate section that swung it against. And since that's happened, a couple of the large trade unions have had, through their conferences, proportional representation motions passed. So it may be that their positions on that have changed, and should it come up again, we might get a different result.
Interesting. Thank you for that insight.
So coming back to this thought on progressive alliances, it was interesting when we looked at, I looked to listen to the politics show this morning, and Ed Davey and David Lammy both said, absolutely not. There was no agreement. There was no kind of, even informal arrangement. It just so happened that in Tiverton, Labour lost their deposit, and in Wakefield, the Lib Dems lost their deposit. I guess in terms of progressive alliance, there is an element where we could say that Portsmouth, with the Labour group looking to support the Lib Dems back into administration rather than the Conservatives, do you see any potential for a progressive alliance in Portsmouth formally, or is it a case that in the majority of seats that you're contesting as a Labour group, it is often the Lib Dems and the Labour Party who are the top two?
Yeah, I can't personally see it as a likely scenario anytime soon. And I guess you have to also ask kind of how you're defining progressive. I know that, I mean, within the Lib Dems, again, the Lib Dems is a broad church as a party and as a movement. It has people of all different ideological and kind of political perspectives. In the local party, we have people who were Tories for many years, and we have people who self-describe themselves as socialists in the local Lib Dems. So clearly, for us and Labour Party, it would be easier for us to work with some of those people than others.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't see it happening anytime soon. And under the current rules, particularly from the Labour Party's perspective, I think also from the Lib Dems, we're not allowed to enter into any kind of electoral pacts prior to the election that might see us stand down. Obviously, like you say, there's a question there about how resources are targeted, and that may happen on kind of an informal basis, particularly nationally. But yeah, I don't think locally it's on the agenda as of yet.
Makes sense. So, sorry, Simon, did you want to come in?
Well, no, I didn't know whether we were moving on to question 9 or.
Yeah, that's where I was headed. No,
yeah.
I was taking a breath. Yeah, no. So, if there's one thing you could change about the way that PCC runs, what would it be?
Well, I think my tongue-in-cheek answer would be to remove the Lib Dems from power and put in a Labour cabinet.
Have Labour. I mean, yeah, okay, that's an obvious answer. Yeah, well done. We didn't see that coming.
More seriously, I mean, something that I have almost been fighting a kind of one-man campaign on to some extent for a little while is the way in which we have used our kind of electoral cycle locally for council elections. So we have council elections 3 out of every 4 years, with a third of councillors up each time. And that is the choice of the local authority to do that. There are other local authorities who have all-out elections every 4 years.
Yeah.
Personally, I mean, this is something actually that is Portsmouth Labour policy. We've put into kind of, I think, all of our budget amendments in previous years around moving to this. And I think the point we've usually made has been around cost. It would be more cost efficient, I think, to the tune of something like 150 grand a year to have all-out elections rather than do it 3 out of every 4 years. But I think there's another, actually a much stronger argument around good governance and long-term planning. I think the current system fosters massively a sense of short-termism. So, I mean, the elections this year, the Lib Dems have been put back into power, and the way in which it works in previous years, it will no doubt work again this year, is they'll spend a few months implementing their policy, trying to make changes that were in their manifesto, etc. Although they didn't actually publish a manifesto, but stuff they feel passionately about. And then the kind of the next 6 to 9 months will be fighting next year's election. And for me, that's a really big block on the kind of longer term strategic thinking and policy we need as a city. I mean, to give an example, the climate crisis is going to require massive changes to the way we live and massive changes to the way that the council runs the city. But I think people are just too scared to have those conversations and start looking at that really kind of transformative policy at the moment, because I think what you're going to need is you're going to need a period of time for those policies to settle in and people see the benefits and adapt the way they live and change their behaviour. You can start to do that over a 4-year term, because you can do kind of the kind of really big policy in the first couple of years and allow people time to get to grips with it. If you've always got an election more or less within 12 months, I think the people in power are just scared to do anything that might upset a particular section of voters and then get punished a few months down the line.
Yeah, and that it is something which, again, when you look at it, that element of, and I think you touched on it in one of your earlier answers, is that in terms of local party politics, the number of activists, the boots on the ground, are not, the numbers aren't enormous. So the fact that they're on a perpetual hamster wheel of campaigning for next year's election probably is quite distracting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also, I mean, clearly it has an impact in terms of council policy and the way that develops. But I mean, from our perspective in the Labour Party, I think it also detracts from some of the other work that we'd like to do. Again, if you're out electioneering, you're not potentially doing other stuff, and whether that's kind of working with members within the party to develop policy, whether it's about reaching out really deeply into communities and kind of campaigning on the issues that matter most to people, and kind of trying to identify community leaders and bring them through and provide the support to local groups that need it. Of course, we do that stuff and we try really hard, but when you've always got one eye on the next election, I think at times it can become a distraction from the other really important work that we all need to be engaged in.
Superb.
Okay, so we're whizzing through these. We're doing well. Last one, Cal. So, what is it that excites you most about leading Portsmouth Labour going forward?
Well, I think it's clear we're on a really good trajectory. When I joined the party in 2015, we had 2 councillors, and in every local election since, we've increased the size of our Labour group. So if we continue to do that, we are on a trajectory to run the council, and that is clearly our ambition, because we want to see our policies and our principles put into action. But I think we can only really do that by continuing to develop the Labour group and the local party. And I think probably what excites me most about that is the team that we have in place now is a really strong one. We've got really skilled and experienced people as part of the Labour group from a whole range of different backgrounds and perspectives, and we work really well as a team. But also within the wider party, we've got a significant number of people who have put themselves forward for local election, whether it be this year or in previous years, and not quite been able to get elected. We also have lots of people who are involved in our local party, in our branches, who have got a lot to contribute and do really important work. So I think we are in a really strong position in terms of building that team that is needed in order for us to continue to make gains and in order for us to continue to campaign in our communities on the issues that are most important to our residents.
So do you believe, and again, forgive the tone of the question, do you think there is a route map for Labour to that magic 22 number in terms of councillors? Because I absolutely agree with you that it's a positive trajectory from 2 to 9, but with the north of the city now being a mix of blue and purple, with that little island of Shah's red dot in Cosham, do you believe that there is a roadmap to a Labour majority?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, a majority is a rare thing in Portsmouth, and we all know you don't necessarily need a majority to be in a position where you lead the council. I think it's been no overall control, for a long period of time. So what you need to get into a position is where you're the largest party. And I think, we are on a trajectory to do that. If we replicate this year's results in terms of the wards we won next year and the year after, we only need one additional seat on top of that to be the largest party. So that there's a clear plan there, there's a clear strategy to do that. And I think with the team that we've got, if we all continue to work together and work hard, then we will do that.
If you had a similar results this year, next year, and the Conservatives had a same result, that'd make you wouldn't that make you the second largest party? That would actually make you the party of opposition in the council, which would be also for an interesting change in the situation, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. That would change the dynamic, and like I say, that is the kind of path that we're on, and we are committed and confident about making that happen.
And would that give an interesting dilemma? Because at the moment, the way the system works, the cabinet system, is that, and we touched on it earlier, is that you have to elect a winner who gets all of the goodies. Do you see there? It always strikes me that in return for your support, you seem to get very little back in return from the Lib Dem administration. If you were the party of opposition, does that lead to a different dynamic?
Well, I think we are the party of opposition as it stands. We may only have the third largest group, but if you look at the policies that are being implemented by the administration, or the policies that are kind of being looked at, whether it's living wage, outsourcing, the climate crisis, these are all issues that the Labour Party has been leading on and has pushed to the top of the agenda. So I think gaining power and gaining control over the cabinet is important. But I think that there's a lot of important work we can do from opposition, and we have been doing over the past couple of years to push our priorities and have them heard by the powers that be.
So watch this space.
Yeah, no, and Cal, thank you for your time today. It's been great to get your insight, and obviously exciting times for yourself, and like you say, there's a plan there. We know that a week can be a long time in politics, so over the next couple of years, who knows which way the tide will run. But is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think we've covered a fair bit over the last 57 minutes, haven't we? So I think I've got all the points across that I wanted to make. I mean, just I guess to conclude, I think we did have a really good result in this year's election, and I think we are in a really good place. We've got a path and we've got a strategy to continue to make gains over the coming years. Hopefully, at some point, be in a position to take control of the council. But whether or not that happens, we will continue to push our policies and represent the residents that have elected us. So thank you both for inviting me on. It's been a pleasure as always, and I look forward to the next time.
That'll be fabulous.
Thank
You've
you.
been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And our guest has been
Cal Corkery.
And I've been Simon Sansbury.